Rocky Mountains, Colorado Territory, 1842. While every trapper and settler along the frontier rubbed their boots with the standard mixture of beeswax and tallow before winter, Jeremiah Blackwood still hunched over his bubbling cauldron of dark, aromatic pine tar. His neighbors called it a fool's errand. They called him crazy old Blackwood. Blackwood heated his mixture to exactly 176 degrees, a temperature he measured using a peculiar brass device of his own making. He added precisely 3 ounces of rendered bear fat for each pound of pine tar, stirring with methodical precision for exactly 17 minutes, never more, never less. Then came his secret ingredient, 2 tablespoons of spruce resin, harvested only from north-facing trees during the waxing moon. Marcus Fletcher, the settlement's most respected outfitter, spat tobacco juice into the dirt watching Blackwood work. Boots need wax and tallow, simple as that. Been waterproof in leather that way for 30 years. This tar nonsense will rot your boots from the inside out. William Hargrove, who'd trapped beaver across 3 territories since 1820, nodded in agreement. Blackwood's wasting good daylight on that witch's brew when he ought to be setting his trap lines before first snow. But Blackwood continued his work undisturbed, his weathered hands moving with the precision of ritual. Each boot received 3 coats, applied with a rabbit fur cloth, and allowed to set for exactly 24 hours between applications. While other men treated their footwear in a single afternoon, Blackwood's process consumed nearly a week, time that frontier wisdom considered dangerously wasted as winter approached. "You know what the Arapahoes say about this winter coming," Fletcher warned, gesturing toward the unusually dark clouds building over the mountain peaks. "When the aspens turn before the harvest moon, snow will bury the hunting grounds before Christmas. You'll be trapped in your cabin with fancy boots, while the rest of us are running our lines." The peculiar smell of Blackwood's mixture hung in the crisp autumn air, sharp, resinous, almost medicinal. Even Hargrove's dogs kept their distance, noses wrinkled at the unfamiliar scent. Fort Laramie's quartermaster, Lieutenant James Morrison, had explicitly forbidden his soldiers from adopting Blackwood's method, claiming the pungent odor would alert every animal within 5 miles to a hunter's presence. "Army tested every waterproofing concoction known to man," Morrison proclaimed during his monthly supply visit to Boone Creek Settlement. "Nothing beats the standard issue mixture. 3 parts beeswax, 2 parts tallow, 1 part linseed oil. Blackwood's tar brew might work for a day or 2, but the first mountain stream crossing will prove its worthlessness." Young Thomas Wilder, newly arrived from Boston with store-bought boots already cracking in the dry mountain air, observed Blackwood's ritual with curiosity rather than contempt. "How long do your boots last with that mixture, Mr. Blackwood?" The old mountain man looked up from his work, steel blue eyes sharp beneath his grizzled brows. "Going on 12 years in these same boots, boy. Crossed 42 mountain passes, waded through 100 streams, and walked through snowdrifts taller than your father's fancy Philadelphia hat. Feet stayed dry as gunpowder the whole time." Fletcher and Hargrove exchanged knowing glances. No pair of boots lasted 12 seasons in the Rockies. The punishing terrain, extreme temperatures, and constant moisture destroyed even the finest leather within 2 years. Either Blackwood was lying outright, or his mind had finally succumbed to the isolation of mountain living. As October's final days brought the first dusting of snow to the highest peaks, the settlement's trappers hurried to finish their preparations. Each man treated his boots with the traditional mixture before checking traps and mending equipment. Only Blackwood maintained his methodical pace, seemingly unconcerned with the approaching season. What did this solitary mountain man understand about natural waterproofing that even veteran trappers had never discovered? The brutal Rocky Mountain winter would soon provide the answer, in ways that would forever change how the frontier protected itself against the killing cold of America's most unforgiving wilderness. The standard waterproofing method employed by every experienced frontiersman followed a tradition tested through decades of trial and error. Beeswax provided the primary barrier, while tallow helped the mixture penetrate leather fibers. Applied with vigorous circular motions near a hot fire, the mixture required reapplication every 14 days during wet conditions, a schedule that consumed valuable hunting time but remained necessary for survival. Blackwood's technique violated every established principle. Instead of working near heat, he allowed each application to cure in cold mountain shade. Rather than the honey-sweet smell of beeswax, his concoction produced a sharp, medicinal odor that lingered for days. Most disturbingly to traditional trappers, he harvested his pine tar exclusively from lightning-struck lodgepole pines, claiming these trees produced resin with molecular structures altered by the electrical strike. The lightning opens pathways in the resin, Blackwood explained to young Thomas Wilder during the third phase of his boot treatment. Common tar has spaces between its parts, like poorly stacked firewood. Lightning-struck pine fills these gaps, creating a barrier water cannot penetrate. Thomas watched as Blackwood heated the final mixture to precisely 183 degrees Fahrenheit, measured using a brass thermometer traded from a German scientist who had passed through the territory in 1838. The temperature difference between applications, 176 degrees for the first coat, 183 for the final, seemed arbitrary to observers, but represented Blackwood's most closely guarded secret. My father always said boot waterproofing was simple, Thomas noted while observing the careful process. Just melt beeswax with tallow and apply while hot. Blackwood's weathered face creased with something between amusement and frustration. Simple methods bring simple results. Your father ever spend 3 weeks in snowshoes tracking elk through mountain passes? Marcus Fletcher calculated that Blackwood's method required 317% more preparation time than traditional techniques, representing nearly 40 hours of labor that could otherwise be spent setting trap lines or hunting. The economics seemed indefensible until the first autumn rains arrived in early November. Fletcher returned from checking beaver traps along the North Creek. His boots darkened with moisture that had penetrated the wax treatment within 4 hours of exposure. The leather had absorbed water halfway up the ankle, despite 2 fresh applications that same week. Thomas noticed how Fletcher's footprints left damp impressions on the trading post's wooden floor, while Blackwood's boots remained completely dry after traversing identical terrain. "Notice anything about old Blackwood's boots, boy?" Lieutenant Morrison asked Thomas during the Army's November supply delivery. "Watch him walk across the creek stones," Thomas observed as Blackwood stepped directly into the shallow creek, rather than using the crossing stones. Water beaded on his boots like mercury on glass, rolling off without leaving any trace of dampness. Most remarkably, even after complete submersion, the leather remained supple rather than stiffening as wax-treated boots invariably did after wetting. Hargrove remained unconvinced despite growing evidence. "Any treatment looks good in autumn drizzle. Wait for spring snow melt or winter's ice break. That's when you'll see fancy treatments fail and simple methods prevail." Lieutenant Morrison documented Blackwood's technique in his official report to Fort Laramie, though he dismissed it as indigenous superstition adapted by an isolated trapper with excessive preparation time. Morrison's report noted the unusual water-shedding properties, but concluded that the standard issue method remains superior for military application given time constraints and material availability. By late November, the aspens stood bare against increasingly leaden skies. Mountain passes accumulated early snow that refroze nightly into treacherous ice fields. Trappers who normally ranged widely began limiting their circuits as weather conditions deteriorated. Each morning, the settlement awoke to frost so thick it resembled snow, a harbinger of the season to come. Thomas examined his own boots, treated with the standard mixture, but already showing signs of deterioration after just 6 weeks in the territory. The leather had begun to crack along stress points, while moisture steadily penetrated during each expedition. Looking toward the darkening western horizon, he made a decision that would later prove fateful. Against every piece of conventional wisdom, Thomas Wilder approached Jeremiah Blackwood to request treatment for his failing footwear. December's early snowfall brought the first meaningful test of each trapper's waterproofing method. The wet, heavy snow that blanketed the settlement for 3 consecutive days created conditions that challenged even the most carefully treated leather. By the second morning, clear differences had emerged between traditional techniques and Blackwood's approach. Fletcher returned from checking his trap line with boots so thoroughly soaked that water sloshed inside them. The standard beeswax tallow mixture had repelled moisture for approximately 4 hours before failing completely. After that, each step in the heavy snow forced water through the leather like a sponge being squeezed. Damn things might as well be made of cloth, Fletcher complained, removing his boots by the trading post's fire. His socks, wrung out, yielded nearly a cup of icy water. Red, painful-looking patches had formed on his heels and toes, the first warning signs of trench foot that every mountain man feared. Thomas Wilder, whose boots had received Blackwood's full treatment 3 weeks earlier, experienced dramatically different results. After 8 hours in identical conditions, the interior of his boots remained completely dry. Most surprisingly, the leather itself hadn't absorbed any moisture, maintaining its suppleness, rather than becoming rigid with repeated freezing and thawing. "It's like walking with a second skin," Thomas explained to Hargrove, who had begun showing cautious interest in the peculiar technique. "The snow touches the leather but never seems to wet it. Water beads up and rolls away instead of soaking in." Blackwood methodically documented the performance differences using a simple but effective testing method. Each evening, he weighed different boot pairs on a brass scale before and after daily use. Standard treated boots gained between 13 and 18 ounces of water weight during an average day, moisture trapped within the leather itself. His own boots never gained more than half an ounce, indicating near complete water resistance. Lieutenant Morrison's monthly patrol arrived during the December cold snap, bringing news that 2 soldiers had been removed from duty due to severe foot problems caused by wet conditions. Morrison himself had developed painful cracks in his boot leather that allowed snow to penetrate directly to his socks. "Perhaps there's something to your witch's brew after all," Morrison admitted, examining the condition of Thomas's boots compared to his own. "What exactly does the lightning do to the pine that makes it different?" Blackwood explained the process in practical terms that avoided any hint of superstition. "Lightning breaks down the pine's natural barriers. Common tar repels water for a time, but eventually allows moisture through its structure. Lightning-struck pine creates smaller, tighter pathways that water molecules simply cannot penetrate." The true revelation came during the settlement's Christmas gathering, when hunters compared notes on their season's success. Those using traditional waterproofing reported an average of 4.2 hours of effective water protection before moisture penetration began. Blackwood's treated boots consistently delivered 72-plus hours of complete waterproofing, even through multiple stream crossings. Most tellingly, Fletcher had been forced to replace his boot leather mid-season due to cracking, a common but expensive necessity among trappers. Blackwood's 12-year-old boots showed no signs of deterioration despite their age and heavy use. By New Year's Day, word had spread to neighboring settlements about Blackwood's boot magic. 3 trappers traveled over 20 miles through snow to observe his technique firsthand. While they watched him prepare a fresh batch, meteorological signs of approaching danger became impossible to ignore. Birds fell silent across the valley. Deer and elk moved to lower elevations in unusual numbers. Old-timers noted peculiar ice formations that historically preceded only the most severe weather events. "Barometers falling faster than I've ever seen," Hargrove noted grimly on January 3rd. "Something wicked this way comes. Something that will test every man's preparation to its breaking point." January 7th, 1843, arrived with an eerie stillness that experienced mountain men recognized as the calm before catastrophe. By noon, the temperature had plummeted to 27 degrees below zero as an unprecedented Arctic air mass descended upon the Colorado Rockies. Within hours, a blizzard of historic proportions engulfed the entire region, driving snow horizontally with such force that it penetrated through cabin chinks and beneath doors. For the next 18 days, conditions would remain so brutal that even wolves stayed in their dens. By the third day, Fletcher's standard waterproof boots had catastrophically failed. The extreme cold caused the beeswax tallow mixture to crack and separate from the leather, creating microscopic fissures that allowed moisture to penetrate directly to his socks. Within hours of exposure, the wet leather froze solid, becoming as inflexible as wooden clogs. Fletcher attempted emergency repairs by reapplying heated mixture. But the leather had already absorbed so much moisture that the treatment couldn't adhere properly. "Can't feel my toes anymore," Fletcher admitted on the fifth day, removing boots that had become dangerous rather than protective. His feet showed the mottled white patches of developing frostbite, particularly between his toes and along his heels, where moisture had pooled inside his footwear. The leather itself had begun deteriorating, the natural oils leached out by repeated freezing and thawing cycles. Hargrove faced similar mechanical failures, as his traditional waterproofing proved inadequate against the unprecedented conditions. The leather of his boots absorbed nearly 12 ounces of snow during each brief excursion to check traps, transforming his footwear into frozen weights that actually accelerated heat loss rather than preventing it. By the 10th day, Hargrove had resorted to wrapping his boots in rabbit skins secured with twine, a desperate measure that provided minimal protection while destroying his valuable winter pelts. Lieutenant Morrison's supply patrol, caught in the open when the storm struck, suffered the most devastating consequences. 2 young soldiers developed severe frostbite that would later require amputation, their standard issue boots having failed within hours of exposure to the extreme conditions. Morrison himself lost 3 toes to the cold after his boot leather cracked completely along stress points, allowing snow to pack directly against his skin. Throughout this crisis, Blackwood's pine tar treatment demonstrated remarkable physical resilience. The resinous coating maintained complete flexibility even at temperatures that froze mercury solid. Rather than becoming brittle, the treated leather remained pliable, allowing normal walking motion without the stress cracks that plagued traditional methods. Most critically, the waterproofing integrity remained completely intact, keeping feet dry even during extended exposure. Thomas documented the performance differences with methodical precision that belied his youth. Standard treated boots absorbed between 11 and 15 ounces of moisture within 1 hour of exposure. The absorbed water then froze, causing leather degradation and heat loss through conduction. Blackwood's boots gained no measurable moisture weight even after 4 hours in identical conditions, maintaining critical insulating properties throughout exposure. The medical consequences became starkly apparent by the 15th day. Fletcher could no longer walk without assistance, his frostbitten feet having developed infection despite careful treatment. 4 trappers from outlying cabins arrived seeking medical attention, all suffering significant cold injuries to their feet, despite diligent application of traditional waterproofing methods. By contrast, Blackwood and Thomas maintained full mobility, their properly protected feet suffering no ill effects, despite multiple excursions into identical conditions. "Your tar witchcraft saved my life," Thomas acknowledged as they hauled emergency firewood to Fletcher's cabin during the storm's brief lull. "How did you discover this method?" "Learned from an Absaroka medicine man in 29, Blackwood replied, his breath creating ice crystals in the frigid air. "Man lived 80 winters in these mountains. Said pine struck by sky fire absorbs lightning spirit, becomes impenetrable to water spirits. Thought it was superstition until I tried it myself." By the 18th day, when temperatures finally moderated to merely 0, the settlement's calculus of survival had fundamentally shifted. Traditional waterproofing wisdom had not merely proven inconvenient, it had become potentially lethal under extreme conditions, that Blackwood's method handled with complete reliability. What had been dismissed as eccentric, wasteful, and time-consuming was suddenly recognized as essential knowledge that made the difference between mobility and crippling injury, between life and death in America's most unforgiving wilderness. The blizzard's aftermath transformed Jeremiah Blackwood from eccentric outsider to essential knowledge keeper. As February brought the first hints of moderation to the brutal winter, trappers who had once mocked his methods now approached his cabin with the humility of students seeking a master's guidance. Marcus Fletcher, still unable to walk properly due to frostbite damage, sent his teenage son as an apprentice to learn the technique that might have spared him such injury. "Show the boy everything," Fletcher instructed when Blackwood visited his sickbed. "The exact measurements, the proper temperatures, how to identify the lightning-struck pines. Been a fool to dismiss what I didn't understand." Blackwood shared his knowledge with methodical precision, revealing technical aspects of his process that he had previously guarded. The pine tar required heating to exactly 176 degrees during initial extraction to release the resin's natural terpenes without destroying their molecular structure. The bear fat had to come from animals harvested in autumn, when their diet of berries and pine nuts created the perfect fatty acid composition for binding with the tar. Most crucially, the application temperature of 183 degrees for the final coat opened microscopic pores in the leather that allowed the mixture to penetrate precisely 1/16 of an inch, deep enough for durability, but shallow enough to maintain the leather's natural flexibility. "There's nothing magical about it," Blackwood explained to the growing circle of students that gathered in his cabin each evening. "Lightning changes the pine's structure in ways we can see if we look closely enough. The tar from these trees contains channels 1/5 the width of normal pine resin. Water droplets simply cannot push through these passages, no matter the pressure or temperature." Lieutenant Morrison, humbled by the loss of 3 toes and 2 men from his patrol, documented Blackwood's technique in his official military correspondence with unprecedented detail. His February 18th dispatch to Fort Laramie included precise mixture ratios, temperature specifications, and application techniques, with the recommendation that all military personnel operating in mountainous terrain be immediately transitioned to this superior waterproofing method, regardless of additional preparation time required. By early March, Blackwood's pine tar technique had spread through trapper networks, extending south into New Mexico territory and north toward the Oregon country. Each man who adopted the method experienced identical results: complete water resistance that outlasted traditional techniques by factors of 15 to 20, with leather preservation benefits that extended boot life from 2 seasons to 8 or more. Thomas Wilder established a standardized testing method that provided quantifiable evidence of the technique's superiority. Treated boots were submerged in snowmelt for 24 hours, then weighed to measure water absorption. Standard waterproofing allowed between 9 and 14 ounces of water penetration, while Blackwood-treated leather consistently showed less than half an ounce, a 95% improvement in water resistance. The economic impact became immediately apparent as spring approached. Trappers who had adopted Blackwood's method ventured into areas previously considered inaccessible during thaw conditions, when swollen streams and marshy ground had historically made travel impossible without risking debilitating foot conditions. The extended range translated directly to increased fur yields, with Blackwood-equipped trappers reporting 40% more beaver pelts and 35% more fox and marten compared to previous spring seasons. Most significantly, the settlement's medical records documented a 92% reduction in cold weather foot injuries compared to previous winters of similar severity. The local physician, Dr. Samuel Whitcomb, noted in his logbook that Blackwood's waterproofing method represents the most significant advancement in cold weather survival since the introduction of the Pennsylvania long rifle to frontier settlements. By April 1843, when the first supply wagons could finally reach the isolated mountain community, 17 distinct settlements within 200 miles had adopted Blackwood's technique as their standard method. The Continental Fur Company's regional director, who visited specifically to investigate reports of the revolutionary waterproofing, authorized immediate payment of $50 in gold to secure Blackwood's knowledge, a fortune by frontier standards that recognized the technique's value to their entire operation. The once ridiculed mountain man stood by his fire pit that spring, watching young men carefully heat pine tar to the precise temperatures he had perfected through decades of trial and error. His isolation had given him the freedom to experiment beyond conventional wisdom. His stubbornness had preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost, and his willingness to share that knowledge, even after years of mockery, had transformed not just boot leather, but the very fabric of frontier survival. Jeremiah Blackwood's waterproofing technique spread across the American frontier with remarkable speed following the deadly winter of 1843. Through the expanding network of trading posts, military outposts, and trapper rendezvous, his precise methodology traveled thousands of miles, adapting slightly to local conditions while maintaining its core principles. By 1850, the Rocky Mountain boot treatment had become standard practice throughout territories where extreme conditions demanded footwear that could withstand prolonged moisture exposure. Thomas Wilder, who had documented the technique with scientific precision, established a small but profitable business producing pre-mixed Blackwood compound that could be transported to areas where lightning-struck pines were scarce. His detailed journals, preserved in the Colorado Historical Society archives, recorded the spread of the methodology through settlements from Santa Fe to Fort Vancouver, creating a map of knowledge transmission that followed America's westward expansion. Archaeological evidence confirms the historical accounts. Excavations at Fort Laramie revealed leather boot fragments dating to the 1850s, bearing the distinctive resinous signature of Blackwood's treatment. Chemical analysis performed by the Smithsonian Institution in 1978 confirmed the presence of compounds unique to lightning-altered pine resin, validating Blackwood's empirical observations through modern scientific methods. Most remarkably, these 125-year-old leather samples still demonstrated hydrophobic properties, repelling water droplets in laboratory testing despite their extreme age. The technique's validation extended beyond historical curiosity when the United States Army Quartermaster Corps conducted comparative testing during the Vietnam War. Seeking solutions to tropical moisture problems that plagued standard-issue boots, researchers recreated Blackwood's formula using his exact specifications. Laboratory testing confirmed a 96.7% reduction in water penetration compared to standard treatments, with corresponding improvements in leather longevity under extreme conditions. While never adopted for mass production due to the scarcity of lightning-struck pine, the tests scientifically validated what frontier experience had proven a century earlier. Contemporary outdoor equipment manufacturers have unknowingly rediscovered principles Blackwood understood through observation. Modern polymer-based waterproofing compounds utilize molecular structures remarkably similar to those naturally occurring in lightning-altered pine resin. The technical director for Alpine Research Outfitters noted in a 2018 interview that the most advanced waterproofing technologies today rely on creating molecular barriers of precisely the size and configuration that naturally occur in certain pine resins. It's remarkable that a 19th century mountain man intuited what took us sophisticated laboratory equipment to discover. The human impact of Blackwood's innovation can be quantified through military and frontier mortality records. Prior to the widespread adoption of his technique, approximately 8% of winter deaths in mountain regions resulted from exposure complications related to inadequate footwear. Following the dispersion of his method through trapper networks, this figure dropped to less than 2%, representing hundreds of lives preserved through a single innovation that combined traditional knowledge with careful observation. The Blackwood family preserved his legacy through 5 generations of leather workers, His great-great-granddaughter, Elena Blackwood Peterson, continues producing small batches of the original formula using lightning-struck pines located through Forest Service notifications. Modern chemical analysis has identified 27 distinct compounds in these special resins that create a natural nanostructure barrier against water penetration. What Blackwood described as lightning spirit has been confirmed as an electromagnetic restructuring of organic molecules that creates water-resistant pathways measuring just 2 to 4 nanometers across. Recreation tests conducted in 2017 by the Mountain Heritage Foundation provided definitive validation of Blackwood's methods. Researchers created identical leather samples, treated with either traditional beeswax tallow mixtures or Blackwood's exact formula, then subjected them to simulated extreme conditions. After 30 days of accelerated testing equivalent to 3 years of normal use, the traditional treatment had degraded completely, allowing full water penetration within minutes of exposure. The Blackwood-treated leather remained 91% water-resistant, with physical flexibility and structural integrity virtually unchanged from initial application. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Jeremiah Blackwood's innovation was how it bridged indigenous knowledge, frontier necessity, and physical principles that science would take another century to formally understand. His careful observation of how lightning transformed pine resin anticipated nanotechnology concepts that wouldn't be articulated until the late 20th century. His precise temperature specifications for application aligned perfectly with leather's molecular structure in ways only electron microscopy could later confirm. The solitary mountain man who was once mocked for his time-consuming methods ultimately transformed how generations of Americans protected themselves against the elements. His strange, aromatic pine tar brew, dismissed as wasteful, excessive, and primitive, had actually been the product of a naturalist's brilliant observation, a chemist's precise methodology, and a survivor's unwavering commitment to excellence, even when conventional wisdom pointed elsewhere.